You are listening to Talking Africa, the podcast that gets behind the latest news from the continent and beyond. It's brought to you by the Africa Report and the Jeune Afrique Media Group in Paris. I'm Patrick Smith and welcome to this week's edition, the first of our new season. Alongside our archive of podcasts on africareport.com, you'll find the latest stories from our correspondents in Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Abidjan and Casablanca. These brilliant journalists will give you the inside story on how the pandemic is changing Africa, its politics, its economies, and its societies. On this week's Talking Africa, we have an in-depth conversation with Tom Burgis, author of a non-fiction thriller called Kleptopia. Just published, it traces the evolution of an international but virtual republic based on stolen money. Burgis starts our discussion with a murder mystery involving the sudden deaths of two South African mining executives in a motel in Springsville, Missouri, USA. Burgis explains how mineral-rich countries in Africa, specifically their political and corporate elite, along with their Western friends, are providing the feedstock for this international kleptocracy.
I think that one of the most horrifying stories in the book is the one of James Bethel and Gerrit Strijdom. They were essentially the number 2 and number 3 people in ENRC's African unit. So ENRC, this £20 billion FTSE 100 London-listed blue chip corporation controlled by 3 ex-Soviet oligarchs. It's essentially a load of privatized Soviet mines bundled together and listed in London. And after that listing in London, off goes ENRC, essentially still the oligarch's vehicle, and starts snapping up some choice mines in Africa, especially in Congo, but also elsewhere. And ENRC is one of the main companies that does mining deals with Dan Gertler, who's featured on your pages many a time, and the Israeli billionaire and close friend of President Joseph Kabila in Congo. Now the target of U.S. sanctions for, as the U.S. Treasury says and Gertler denies, cutting in Kabila on these mining deals that he struck. So he was doing deals with Glencore and he was doing deals with the NRC. What happened was that between about 2009, 2012, ENRC snapped up a load of mines in Congo and elsewhere in Africa. And the number 1 guy who was orchestrating ENRC's African wheeling and dealing is a very mysterious chap called Victor Hanna, very publicity-shy American, who was understood by some of his colleagues to be ex-American military. Some of them thought he was ex-American intelligence. Didn't appear to have any background in mining, so he needed some people who actually did know about mining and about digging copper and cobalt out of the ground. And those 2 people were James Bethel and Gerrit Strijdom. Right. So they were very senior in the business, but they were more on the sort of mining side. They're people who are interested in getting stuff out of the ground, really. Less so in the sort of incredibly complex and volatile political arrangements of Congolese mining. So they do this job for a few years. Bethel is number 2, Strijdom is number 3. They're both in their mid-40s, South African men. And around the start of 2015, they both decide to leave ENRC. There's various reasons offered for that. One is that there'd been a big shake-up within ENRC. It was there'd been a big corruption scandal in London, allegations that ENRC's Congolese mines had been acquired through bribery, chiefly in Congo, and it had been placed under investigation by the Serious Fraud Office, one of the highest stakes investigations by the SFO. Shortly after that investigation was opened, 2013, the oligarchs behind ENRC shifted it away from London, took it off the stock exchange, shuffled it off to Luxembourg, and there was a change of personnel. Victor Hanna left the company. And some people think that that's why Bethel and Strijdom decided to leave, that new faces were coming in. there were others who say that they'd had fallings out, or that they had an axe to grind. They had lots of information. They had a new project to go to. There's lots of different possibilities put forward by the people who knew them. Anyway, before they go and do whatever they were planning to do next, they decided to take a holiday, and they're both big bikers.
Right.
So you're not a big biker, I don't believe, Patrick, and neither am I, but we know some, you know.
Yeah. a few years ago, I tried one.
Yeah, right. Well, off they went. They went down to, they lived, Stradum lived in Zambia, near Ndola, near the Congolese border.
Uh-huh.
And Bethel, he would live sort of between South Africa and Congo,
Right.
Often in Lubumbashi.
Yeah.
And they met up in Johannesburg.
Mm-hmm.
And they took a flight to Schiphol in Amsterdam. And on the connecting flight to Chicago, they both started to feel unwell.
Mm.
They got to, we know this because they were sending messages that later ended up in a coroner's report.
Right.
They get to Chicago. This is early May 2015. And they still feel a bit funny, but they hire their Harley Davidsons. This is their big trip. They've got a load of cash for it, and they're going to bike Route 66 all the way from Chicago to LA.
Right.
And they set off, and they get a few days into their trip, but they're still feeling pretty weird. Sort of bad stomach and fluey and achy, fatigued. And they're putting this down to jet lag or God knows what. They get to Springfield, Missouri, where nothing much has ever happened. It's just on Route 66. Check into La Quinta Inn. Stay a couple of nights because they're not feeling well, and then decide to stay a bit longer, one more night. One of them is seen buying a bottle of water in the lobby on the Friday night. Saturday morning goes past. No one's heard from them. The last people to hear from them had heard from them by message on the Friday evening, and they'd seemed perfectly compass mentis, but still a bit unwell. At 1:00 on the Saturday afternoon, the staff at the hotel open the doors to their separate rooms and find them both dead.
Right.
Now, what killed them? There's nothing in the room to say what did. And we still don't know what killed them.
So
what we have now,
police moved in to do an investigation at that point. Was there
police came in and they saw the state of the rooms. These guys had obviously been ill, and they immediately realized these guys came from Africa and thought, oh my God, it's this thing that's in the news. It's Ebola. This is 2015. So they were pretty panic stricken about that. The local coroner did an investigation, couldn't work out what it was. He didn't have very good equipment. And the toxicology tests he sent off came back only half done from a pretty substandard laboratory. ENRC themselves flew in a celebrity coroner, a guy called Michael Barden, who's a sort of Fox News commentator / celebrity coroner. Neither of them could establish what had happened, but they did see some sort of irregularities in the tissues.
Right.
The next thing that happens is the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, this big federal agency that gets called in when there's a strange case like this.
One that's based in Atlanta.
Yeah. They get samples. They receive samples. They test them, and they find that in the samples they've received, there are malaria parasites. Now, that was the end of it for a while. They didn't actually conclude that was the cause of death, but they did tell the police, we found malaria present. And the police announced 6 weeks after the death, these guys died of cerebral malaria. They were cremated and their ashes were sent back to South Africa.
And was that must have been with the family's permission, presumably, that they were cremated?
My understanding is that in these kind of situations, the only way in which bodies are permitted to be repatriated are as ashes.
Right. So that was their choice.
A lot of people who looked at Congolese mining, the world of ex-Soviet business that ENRC operates in, even the sharper end of South African mining, Brett Kebble and that kind of stuff. They could see that these guys operated in a world full of perils and where people get killed. It's important to be clear that no one is accusing ENRC. People are saying that these guys were working within ENRC, and ENRC moves in this incredibly fraught and dangerous world.
Why did the ENRC send their own celebrity coroner to check out the story? They feared bad publicity?
ENRC sent several people. They sent Victor Hanna himself, who by then wasn't working for the company, but still has an association with the trio because he married one of their daughters.
Right.
They sent a guy called Sean McCormack, who used to work in Bill Clinton's National Security
and who's amongst other things, was an Africa expert, yeah? Worked with
was an African and had been working for ENRC
right.
in Africa as a contractor working closely with Victor Hanna.
Right.
Sean McCormack was one of the people that the city lawyer called Neil Gerard, who did ENRC's internal corruption investigation, that he tried to figure out what McCormack's role was and never did to his satisfaction. So Sean McCormack is sent. They hire local lawyers. They send out their own coroner, seemingly just to oversee the process.
Right.
And nothing more is heard of this for several years. Lots of people looked at it and thought, this seems very peculiar that these two people would die. And the nagging thing for anyone who spent any time in Africa is, one, it seems odd that guys who operate in Congo so often would get malaria at all. They wouldn't have been on anti-malaria pills or have some immunity or something like that. But stranger still, it just seemed to people very unlikely that they'd die at the same time. But for a very long time,
statistically, I'd say.
Well, this is it. But for a very long time, we didn't really have any access to any of the case information. So at one stage during my book, I spoke to someone who knew these guys, and he swore down to me and said they did not die of malaria. I can't prove it, but I'm convinced of that. I also then learned that people within the Serious Fraud Office had been very worried about this case because, and this is in the book, they had been planning to interview James Bethel as a witness, possibly Stridham too. So now we've got a case of two people suddenly dying who were both potentially important witnesses to the UK's biggest corruption investigation, which gives it a rather different edge.
Huge. And has ENRC responded to questions about that? I mean,
no. They've sent me a great many threatening letters about this and other matters. But the reason that I was able to write the account that I've written in the book is because one very startling thing happened. After these people started telling me these guys did not die of malaria. I just I had occasionally called or emailed the Springfield police and just said, you've said this is a malaria case. It's not a homicide investigation. And anyway, it's obviously over because you've said publicly it's malaria. So can we have, could you just release the autopsies or whatever Missouri law allows in these cases, death certificates, that kind of thing. And after a little bit of toing and froing, the person who does media relations at Springfield Police emailed me about 18 months ago and said, we're not allowed to release this information because this is still an active case, which rather raises the question.
Active with who? The FBI? Or?
With the Springfield Police.
With the Springfield.
At that stage, with the local police force. Right. Which raises the question, if you've told the public that these two people died of cerebral malaria,
why is it active?
Why is your case open?
Right. And they weren't prepared to explain further?
No, they gave some sort of confusing partial reasons about whether the toxicology report was or wasn't in the police file where it should have been, but they wouldn't really explain what was going on. Anyway, I kept asking them occasionally, and in the meantime, did more reporting on this in South Africa and the UK and elsewhere, and started to make some progress with the American Freedom of Information law. And what we got hold of eventually was some of the police emails about the case.
Yeah, right.
And then all the CDC's emails about the case.
Right.
And what I did was I took the and also some medical evidence from the case that's come from people who were connected to the men. So what I was able to do then was go to Sam